Hello, hello. Welcome back to another episode of Good Grief Life After Loss. I'm your host, Skylar, and I am so glad you are here today. I hope everyone is enjoying some maybe spring weather where you are. I am recording and it is currently pouring rain outside, but we did have one day that was 70 and sunny last week, so I feel like we're almost officially in spring, hopefully. To dive honestly just right into today's episode, I want to focus on grief and school today. And I understand that a lot of my listeners are past that time of their life. They have already graduated school, same with me. But I also know that the original idea behind this podcast was to support young grievers. And what I've learned is that grief is so universal and it doesn't have a preference of what age you are. And no matter what age you are, a lot of the feelings are the same and consistent, which is why this podcast works for so many different demographics. But staying true to the original intention behind this podcast, which was providing a resource for young grievers out there in the world, I wanted to do an episode today focused on the reality of what it is like to be a student after the most horrible, unthinkable thing has happened to you and you are returning to the classroom as a griever. And the truth is that after loss, people often focus on the obvious pain, the funeral, the tears, the shock and heartbreak, but what people do not always talk about is what comes next. Once the dust has settled, the funeral has happened, everyone has paid their respects, then what? What about the first Monday morning after the tragedy? The classroom, the homework, the attendance sheet, the report card, the strange expectation that life should just resume because that's what's supposed to happen. And for me, it just did not. And I would imagine most grievers feel the same. For me, when Sam passed away, I had missed about a month of school leading up to that point because we were in Australia for over 20 days while he was in a coma. And then we came back, we had the memorial service to plan, celebration of life, and then just the reality that going back to school sounded like actual hell. Not to mention I was in 9th grade, which is already just a weird time to be a human. And so when it was finally time to go back, and I felt like I had to go back, there was no longer the choice of me staying at home, I remember feeling completely convinced that I was just already way too far behind to recover. I wasn't nervous, wasn't unsure. I was absolutely certain that I had missed too much already, certain that everyone else had moved on without me, and certain that if I went back and tried, I would fail, without a doubt. And I do feel it is important to mention that before Sam passed away, long before actually, I was not an A student. I had never been a star student. I was not the kid that effortlessly got A's. I did not love studying. I actually despised it, and school just did not seem to click for me, which is crazy because I was surrounded by all of my friends who were the honors student. They had 4.0 GPAs. They were naturally academic. I remember the shame of like when we got to high school, they would have honor roll cupcakes where you just had to come up and tell them your name, and if you were on the honor roll list, you got a cupcake. And I remember all the girls at the table would get up and be like, let's go get our cupcakes. And I would make the excuse of like, I'm going to run to the bathroom because I truly did not think my name was going to be on that list, even though it actually was a lot. But I did not think my name was going to be on that list. And I was so ashamed of all of my friends being so smart and me just not having strong academic abilities. I had other abilities, but school was not for me. It just wasn't. So, picture that kid and grief hitting her. It's that kid who already does not feel especially confident in the classroom. And now this thing has happened. She's missed a month of school and feels like she has fallen completely behind. In a month of high school, might I add. Like, it all felt like child's play up until high school. And so I think somewhere in my 14-year-old brain, I internally made a decision that if I am going to fail anyways, I would rather quit first. And I think that is one of the sneakiest ways grief can show up and did show up for me. It's not just sadness, it truly is self-sabotage. Like deciding to give up before something can reject you and hurt you and cause you pain and sadness and grief. And so one of the first things I did when I returned to school was drop geography class and decide to take it online. And at the time, it felt smarter, easier, less pressure, more manageable. And I remember I came back to the first day in that geography class, I sat down and I realized that in the month I had been gone, they had already covered the entire continent of Asia. And I just decided there was no coming back from that. There was no way I was going to learn all of that geography and then keep up with what the class was currently learning. So I decided to drop out. And while that felt like a good decision, in reality, it was a terrible decision because imagine taking online geography at a time where Google is alive and well and thriving. The reality of that is you don't actually learn geography. You learn how to complete assignments and Google what is the capital of this country. And to this day, I will be at a trivia night with friends. A outline of a country comes up on a map and you get asked, what is the capital of this? Everyone at the table knows the answer. They're like, oh, easy. Obviously, we know that. And I am left sitting there feeling so stupid and transported back to 9th grade where I was grief avoidant, made a stupid choice that has literally stuck with me for the rest of my life, which is wild. And that is what grief can do. It can make you choose short-term relief that creates long-term consequences. Instead of sitting and being uncomfortable in geography class during the school day, asking for help, putting in the hours, I decided to become a TA, I'm putting that in air quotes, by the way, for the librarian, which maybe to you sounds productive. Like maybe I was helping run the library, but I was not. I was hiding in the library. I spent 90 minutes a day shelving books, sorting things, wandering the halls, messing around, doing literally anything except actually learning. And honestly, when I look back on that, I think the library just felt like a safe call. There was no pressure, no tests, no chance to fail and get a bad grade. And when you're grieving, I think sometimes safety just becomes the goal. It's not growth, not progress, not excellence, none of that, just safety. And I remember coming home after school one day and my mom was so upset with me because one of my high school English teachers had emailed her saying that I had not turned in an assignment on time and I had missed the deadline. This was a few weeks after returning back from Australia. And she was so upset with me and could not understand why I could not just simply write the paper and get the assignment done. And she made the point like, hey, this is high school. These grades start to matter. They're on your transcript when you apply for college. Like, this is important. And she just could not wrap her mind around the fact that I could not sit down, take the 3 hours to write the paper. And the truth is, I did not care at all. And not because I was rebellious or because I wanted to be difficult, not because I was lazy. I did not care because when your brother dies, suddenly school feels really freaking ridiculous and pointless. Like, you're asking me about a worksheet, about formatting, about deadlines. You're asking me to cite my sources? Meanwhile, my entire understanding of life has changed at just 14 years old. And that disconnect can be so hard for a grieving person to explain, let alone a 14-year-old child. Like, the world is saying, hey, this still matters. You still have to show up to school and study and get good grades. And grief is saying, actually, nothing matters right now. Literally nothing. And it's really hard to balance those two competing priorities. And then came math. Math had always been my hardest subject, even on a good day, even on my best day, I was not good at math. And so after Sam died, I felt certain that there was absolutely no way I could succeed in math class anymore. Not that I was succeeding before, truthfully. And so I convinced my parents to let me drop that class too and took it online. And this is where I want to be really honest, because even now, years later, I still have to wonder and ask myself, was that grief or was that a cop-out? Did grief truly make that class too hard to manage, or did I use grief as permission to quit something I already feared and was already failing at? And that's a brutal question a lot of grieving people carry, or at least I know I carry. I'd have to imagine someone else out there can relate. Because sometimes after a loss, it is truly hard to tell the difference between what grief genuinely is limiting, what grief is magnifying and making so much harder, and what we simply just stopped believing we could do. And I remember my mom being so skeptical about letting me make that decision to drop the math class, and the school counselor reassuring her that me taking online math would not affect my chances of getting into a good college. And in the end, that advice really came back to haunt me years later, because when it was finally time to apply for colleges, my dream school was Babson College in Boston. I wanted Babson so badly. And then I got deferred. And along with that deferral was a message that basically said accepted students need to complete and pass pre-calculus because without it, they are unlikely to succeed at Babson. And wow, talk about being confronted by a bold and not well thought out choice. A choice that I had made in grief, a choice I made at 14 years old, a choice that suddenly followed me into adulthood and the rest of my future. And so as a result, I spent the summer after I graduated high school taking pre-calculus with a tutor, going through the courses, because the rule was if I took that class and I got a B or above, I would be into Babson. And so I did that. I got myself there a semester later, because it took me the first semester to take that damn class. And once I arrived, they were right. You did certainly need to know your math in order to survive there. And I found myself immediately struggling because I just stopped taking math in high school, thinking that was a wise choice. And suddenly I was behind, I was overwhelmed, I felt exposed, and honestly, I think I am one of the few people who academically benefited from COVID-19, because halfway through that first year math class, we got moved online. And after I had spent the first few months completely drowning, suddenly I had more time to take tests and study, and that is probably the only way I passed that class. And without that shift to online, I don't know that I would have passed. And there, I think, is a lot of humility in admitting that, but honestly also a lot of shame in admitting that, because I think sometimes people hear stories about grief and resilience and they want the clean, inspiring version, the like, oh, she overcame everything and was successful and got into her dream college. They want that version, but the truth is much messier than that. Grief did not just hurt emotionally, it truly did change the trajectory of my education. It affected my confidence, my discipline, my relationship with hard things, my belief that I was capable of doing hard things. And I think so many young grievers carry consequences no one sees. People notice the funeral, but they do not notice the GPA 3 years later that is still struggling. People send flowers and send notes, but they don't see the student quietly dropping out of class. People say, let me know if you need anything, but they don't realize that what you may need is someone to actually help you believe in your future, believe that you have a future that still matters, and to push you to be successful. And there is a huge part of me that wishes more schools understood that grief is not just an absence, it is a full-on disruption. It disrupts your concentration, memory, motivation, identity, hope, all of that. And if you are a grieving student listening right now, whether you're in high school, college, grad school, whatever stage you're in, what I want to say to you is that if you are struggling, it does not automatically mean that you're lazy. If you are falling behind, it does not mean you are failing. If you simply don't care right now, it does not mean that you are ungrateful or irresponsible. Sometimes it means you are just carrying something so unimaginably heavy, and your nervous system is in full-on survival mode, and it means you're grieving. And I think that is okay and expected, and the world just does not have enough grace for that. However, with that being said, I have also seen in my own self that grief can explain behavior without excusing it forever. And that is something I have had to learn too. Like, I certainly have a lot of compassion for the 14-year-old version of me who was drowning, but I can also acknowledge that some of those choices cost me later. Like, both of those things can be true. And while grief truly did have such an effect on me, and it changed the way I view the world and relationships and work and all the things I loved before, I also think at 14 years old, I allowed grief to become an excuse and a crutch for a lot of things. Like, suddenly I had this one word I could say to get out of anything, and it worked, and it made things a lot easier in a way. And of course, in many other ways, it made life a lot harder. And like I said, I think both of those things can be true. And maybe that's maturity. Not blaming yourself endlessly, but also not excusing everything forever. Just understanding the full picture at hand. And if I could go back and talk to 14-year-old Skylar returning to 9th grade after losing Sam, I think what I would tell her is, yes, you are behind right now, and that is scary, but you are not ruined. Yes, you are struggling right now, but you are not stupid. Yes, you are grieving right now, but that is not the end of your story, and you cannot let that be your entire story. And 100% I would tell her to stay in geography so I could feel better about myself at trivia. I think we all have a lot of things we regret in life, whether grievers or not grievers. But I think my advice to anyone who finds themselves in a situation that I found myself in when I was 14 years old is to give yourself grace, because you are grieving, and this is a huge change that will affect you for the rest of your life. But also to remember that you still have a whole life worth living, and you cannot let this one moment define you and derail the life that you have left. And that's all I have for you today. So thank you so much for listening to this week's episode of Good Grief. If this resonated with you, or if this made you think of a friend, please share it with someone who might need it. If you enjoyed this episode, leave a 5-star review, send me a message, let me know what you think. And if you are grieving while trying to keep up with school or work or life right now, I see you, I feel for you, I believe in you, and you are doing much more than most people realize. So give yourself some grace.